November 1968, Richard Nixon acknowledges the cheers of Republican supporters after winning the presidential election. 3 years later, it's once again election time in the United States. President Nixon is running for a second term, and the big question for 1972 is, can he be beaten, and if so, by whom? No fewer than 12 candidates are contesting the Democratic Party nomination for president, and the first signs of who's likely to be President Nixon's opponent in November will come from the results of the Florida primary election, one of 24 Democratic primaries to be held this year. In a crowded field, the candidate most fancied to win in Florida is this man, 52-year-old George Wallace, whose family has been influential in Southern politics for a generation, and who is himself now serving a third term as governor of Alabama. Wallace earned himself a notorious reputation in the 60s as a dyed-in-the-wool racialist because of his unswerving opposition to all attempts to enforce desegregation in the South, and his meetings were frequently interrupted by militant young Negroes who called him a fascist. Wallace assumed national importance in 1968 when, as an independent third-party candidate, he opposed both Nixon and Humphrey in the presidential elections. He didn't win, but he came within an ace of deciding the result. He polled 10 million votes, captured 5 southern states outright, and had he won 3 more, he'd have held the balance between the 2 main candidates. Wallace has learned from that experience, and this year intends to win even more southern states to give himself a strong bargaining position.
Back in Tennessee, I went to Tennessee the other day, and you can enter all 3 primaries in Tennessee, and when I got there, a group of young Tennesseans for Wallace from Memphis State and other colleges had already gotten enough signatures for me to get in the Republican primary, the American Party primary, and the Democratic primary. So we at least have given the Tennessee paper something to write about. We may enter all 3 of them in Tennessee. And I don't want to be facetious about it, frankly. I think it's good to let them think about it. Let them think about this movement, because we represent more people than votes we got. I think all of you recognize that. We are now recognized not only as a part of the United States in some degree, but we are recognized as having the balance of power in national politics. And that's exactly what happened in 1968. Because my candidacy for the presidency defeated Mr. Humphrey and elected Mr. Nixon, and all the analysis show that.
Although Wallace has tempered his racial extremism of previous years, he still opposes desegregation and attacks as hypocritical the federal policy of enforcing it by busing children from one neighborhood to schools in another.
At the Southern Governors Conference recently, and you newsmen have written about how moderate governors are getting in the South, I've always been moderate myself. You just haven't given me credit for it. I've just been against all this hypocrisy I see up here, you know, and people talking one way and doing another. And these folks that talk about schools down our way and got the children in exclusive private schools that ride them over with limousines, you know, and put them out with chauffeurs and so forth. We just didn't understand all of those things.
In all his speeches, Wallace emerges as the South's favorite son, the man of the people, who believes in straight talking and firm action. His broad humor is popular with his audiences, especially when directed at intellectuals, the establishment, or even the president.
In fact, I said at the gridiron dinner, you know, you're supposed to poke sophisticated fun at the president, and he pokes sophisticated fun at you. It's not hard to poke fun at anybody when they're not around you, but you know, the president's sitting right to your right. It was a pretty difficult task to poke sophisticated fun at the gridiron dinner. But I did say, as sophisticated as I knew how, that in... See, they laughing like they think I'm a redneck out there, but you know that ain't so. Now, what was I talking about? Oh, yes, but I was first on the program there. You know, Chief Justice Warren was there, and a lot of you moguls from the press were there, and there was the astronauts, and there was, I don't know, the Tom Dewey and Senator Kennedy and all the rest of them, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and there was the cabinet, you know, and there I was. And wasn't a single person there for me that night, I don't think, except the piano player. And the only reason, in the orchestra, the only reason I think that, he played Dixie one time. And but I told him that one thing for sure, I can make a good or bad speech here tonight. I'm not going to lose any votes in this crowd.
Latest opinion polls show that Wallace has a substantial lead in Florida. In the presidential elections 4 years ago, he got 29% of the vote here, running Humphrey a very close second. But even if he wins the primary this time, he knows that his appeal is not broad enough for him to become a serious contender for the national Democratic nomination. After Florida, he will test the water in a few more primaries before retreating into the South to revitalize his third-party machine. One candidate who certainly does have national appeal is 60-year-old Hubert Humphrey, the senator from Minnesota, the man who lost to Nixon in '68 and is now seeking the Democratic nomination for the third time in 12 years.
History will note the failures of the Nixon administration.
Humphrey is confident he can create a successful image, not so much of a new Humphrey, but of an old Humphrey, who can make a comeback in time to win at the Miami convention in July and sweep Nixon from the White House in November.
So I ask you to join with me, and let's face up to the realities of our present posture. Our urgent, immediate need, first on the agenda of national priorities, is to end the war, and to do it now. But there are other urgent matters. We must revitalize our economy and put our people back to work, and do it now. We must create a respect for law and for justice if we are to stop crime. The attack on drug abuse, which has taken on epidemic proportions, must be given the highest priority. And a massive effort must be undertaken to make our cities livable, safe, and clean, and we must undertake that effort now.
Humphrey's great asset is his tremendous energy. He's a formidable campaigner. In 1968, he began way behind Nixon in the opinion polls, yet came within 500,000 votes of winning. Indeed, had the campaign gone on for a few more days, he would almost certainly be occupying the White House today. Humphrey lost to Nixon last time, largely because of his association with the outgoing President Lyndon Johnson. As Vice President, Humphrey was committed to supporting LBJ's unpopular policies on Vietnam, and his loyalty cost him a good deal of support on the left of the Democratic Party, support he still has to win back. But he has a first-class record as a liberal and has now taken a definite stand against the war. Humphrey is also burdened by the memory of some of his speeches in the '68 campaign. Some Democrats still remember with dismay the way he preached the politics of joy at a time when American society seemed to be falling apart at the seams.
And here we are just as we ought to be. Here we are, the people. Here we are in the spirit of dedication. Here we are the way politics ought to be in America. The politics of happiness, the politics of purpose, and the politics of joy. And that's the way it's going to be, too, all the way from here on out.
Much of Humphrey's strength lies in his appeal to America's numerous minority groups. He's a genuine liberal with an impressive record going back to 1948, when he was responsible for the Democratic Party including civil rights on its electoral platform, thereby starting a social revolution. Later, he piloted civil rights legislation through the Senate. With such a record, it's not surprising that Humphrey has more support among the black communities than any other leading candidate. Humphrey, as he freely admits himself, has been on the political scene for a very long time, but the party bosses are not writing him off yet. He's well liked among the older generation. He has an organization that reaches into almost every state, and he's been promised all the money he needs to conduct his campaign. An interesting point about Humphrey is that he somehow managed to retain his provincial character despite his prominence on the national stage. Some still consider him a small-timer, a man not big enough for the presidency, and with an insufficiently broad outlook to lead America in the world at large. And yet, he's served 4 terms in the Senate, 4 years as vice president, and only missed the presidency by a hair's breadth. His supporters think that's a record good enough for any candidate. But despite his support among minority groups and his strong party connections, Humphrey still needs a good showing in the early primaries to wipe out the memories of Vietnam, the violence of the Democratic Convention in Chicago 4 years ago, and the election defeat that followed. It remains to be seen whether he'll get that showing, or whether the primaries will prove that an old dog has had his day. But if he doesn't, it won't be from lack of campaigning, for Hubert Humphrey is a man who runs and runs and runs. Hubert Humphrey is the Democrats' oldest candidate. This man is their newest, John Lindsay, the glamorous 50-year-old mayor of New York City. After a lifetime in Republican politics, he switched over to the Democrats only 6 months ago, and his campaign may suffer from a lack of organized party support. Lindsay's hopes rest almost exclusively on his record as chief administrator of the world's second-largest city, an office he's held for over 6 years. New York's been called the ungovernable city, and certainly Lindsay's had only partial success in tackling its vast problems. But he has tried to get at the roots of those problems, like making a start on the removal of hideous ghettos like these and extending welfare benefits to the unemployed and the sick who have to live in them. The municipal housing program alone anticipates the spending of $24,000 billion over the next 10 years. Lindsay now has an encyclopedic knowledge of the city's problems, probably better than any previous mayor, and in accumulating it, he's gained valuable insight into the plight of the urban poor. He argues that Washington has its priorities wrong in neglecting the 2/3 of America's population who live or work in the cities.
I served for a decade in Washington, in the executive branch and in the Congress. I made speeches, I wrote laws, but any single week as mayor of New York, confronting crime, disease, and stunted lives, confronting the same reality that I have seen in dozens of towns and cities and suburbs across the country, has taught me more about America than all of my years in Washington. It stripped me of any illusion that nice words and good intentions can change a single life for the better.
Lindsay has, of course, had his failures. His term of office has been plagued by all kinds of labor disputes among municipal workers, which have threatened to bring the city to the verge of collapse. Huge piles of uncollected garbage have mounted in the streets, schools have been closed during teachers' strikes, public transport has been brought to a standstill, and at one stage, even the police refused to report for duty. But somehow, New York has survived, and Lindsay has emerged from these trials as one of the few men in America thoroughly experienced in the art of crisis management. On the credit side of the balance sheet, Lindsay's spent much of his time trying to improve the physical environment in which New Yorkers live. He restrained motor traffic through Central Park in an attempt to restore it as a place for recreation and leisure, and he's been in the forefront of youthful demonstrations against the pollution of the nation's air and water. Lindsay's often led the way in the field of urban renewal, showing mayors from other cities the problems of New York and the solutions being applied.
A lot of mayors here today.
Look at me, I gotta get the canvas.
Yeah.
I want to get this canvas.
You live here?
No, I haven't done a lot.
You ever live here?
Yeah.
You ever live here?
Here.
You live here? You live here? Who's the landlord, you know?
Yes, I know, but he don't live here.
Where's he live, you know?
In the Queen.
Lindsay maintains that more might have been achieved had the state government, under its Republican governor, Nelson Rockefeller, been more sympathetic to the city's problems and voted more funds to help solve them. Relations between the mayor and the governor have frequently been strained in the last few years and probably played some part in driving Lindsay from the Republican Party. The final divorce came in August last year, and Lindsay told Americans why he'd become a Democrat.
Today, the Republican Party has moved so far from what I perceive as necessary policies for our city and for the country that I can no longer try to work within it. It has become clear that the Republican Party and its controlling leaders in Washington have finally abandoned the fight for a government that will respond to the needs of most of our people and of those most in need. I joined the Democratic Party today because it offers the best hope for a change in national direction and national leadership in the 1972 election.
In seeking the Democratic nomination, Lindsay is cutting across the traditional ways of campaigning. Unlike other candidates, he lacks a broad, solid base among one particular section of the electorate. He's no support among farmers and has few friends in the trade unions. Old-time party workers among the Democrats regard his recent conversion to the party with suspicion, and the Republicans treat him with contempt. But Lindsay believes that urban problems will increasingly become the politics of the future, and he thinks he may be able to hold together a new coalition of the unemployed, the minority groups, and middle-income city dwellers. And it was to these people that he addressed his declaration speech.
I'm here because I share in common with hundreds of mayors and citizens an overwhelming sense of exclusion from the power centers of Washington. A sense that how we live, what we care about, what we need for a chance for a better life simply does not matter to those who run this country. And in 1972, someone must speak for the America that Washington has ignored. If you work with your hands, or work the land, or cannot find work, if you are a Vietnamese villager, or an East Pakistani, or a GI hooked on heroin on the other side of the world, you will hear nothing from the corridors of power but the echo of your cries for help. For this government is a government willing to travel to Peking or Moscow, but not to Harlem, or to Watts, or to Appalachia, or to the unemployed in Cape Kennedy, not to the places where Americans wait for help. So this is the choice for 1972. Will the White House remain a clubhouse for privileged power at home and the parade ground for juntas and generals from around the world? Or will we choose to stand for something better? Will we choose to be what our best instincts tell us that we can be? Compassionate, trusting, willing by our deeds to bind up the wounds among our countrymen, to turn away from the work of death abroad and begin the work of life at home. Should I win the primary battles, I do not believe that closed-door politics can or will override the choice of the people. But win or lose, I intend to run on the belief that this nation wants to stand for something better than privileged power. And I will run that kind of campaign because I intend to be that kind of president. Thank you.
According to present opinion polls, the favorite to clinch the Democratic nomination is 57-year-old Edmund Sixtus Muskie, the senator from Maine. The polls give him a lead in no fewer than 29 states and place him a full 10 points ahead of Hubert Humphrey, his nearest rival. The son of a Polish Catholic immigrant tailor called Marczewski, he finally killed off an undeserved reputation for slow-wittedness in 1946 when he won a seat in the state legislature. He then held down the post of state governor for 2 terms before being elected to the Senate in 1958. During his 13 years in the Senate, he gained a reputation for thoroughness and competence and was responsible for putting several anti-pollution laws on the statute book. He finally came into national and international prominence 4 years ago, when his friend Humphrey chose him to be his vice presidential running mate. Now the friends are rivals, and Muskie is seeking a ticker-tape parade of his own. Muskie is known for his caution and objectivity. He's been described as a man who looks for 7 sides to a 4-sided question. It's said of him that when he was in his 30s and courting a local salesgirl called Jane Grey, he refused to give her an engagement ring for 2 years until he'd finished paying for it. They've now been married for 23 years and have 5 children. Muskie is the first to admit he's no political messiah. He lacks the charisma of a Lindsay or a Kennedy, but he's aware of the need for a touch of glamour to improve his political image. He has, in fact, been carefully cultivating his image as a national figure ever since he began his unofficial campaign for the presidency more than a year ago. His approach is low-key, stressing integrity and impartiality, qualities which he believes contrast sharply with the tricky-dicky image of President Nixon.
I am seeking the presidency not merely to change presidents, but to change the country. I intend to lead, to ask you to make America what it was to Abraham Lincoln, the last best hope of mankind. I intend to ask you to try, and to be willing to try again if we fail. And I intend to ask every one of you to pay a fair share of the costs of a decent society. That challenge is great, but we can meet it. We can bring freedom within the reach of every American, the freedom to escape poverty, deprivation, discrimination, and disease. We can ensure that government will be the servant, not the master of our people, responsive to our needs and voices, and solicitous of our liberties. We can enlarge our country's influence and prestige around the world by demonstrating in all our policies, at home and abroad, our commitment to human dignity.
Muskie's had the best start of all candidates in this year's campaign. He's been trying to evoke the memory of President Truman's triumph in 1948 by embarking on a nationwide whistle-stop tour aboard the Muskie Sunshine Special. In his policy speeches, he's consistently stressed national issues, even when this may hurt him in particular states. Here in Florida, for instance, he's stuck to his declaration that President Nixon is giving too high a priority to the Space Shuttle project, even though space is a major Florida industry. Muskie's overall strategy is simple. Although he's campaigning in all 24 primaries, he's attempting to win, or at least make a good showing, in the first half dozen or so, thereby forcing his rivals to withdraw from the race.
The Honorable Senator Edmund Muskie, the next President of the United States.
Although the polls so far show that he'll at least hold his own against the other candidates, Muskie's success is by no means assured, and one bad result in any one of the early primaries could wreck his chances.
And all the rest of us who are riding on this train, I see some Nixon supporters in back. I think we
Florida is an especially important state for Muskie to do well in, because it's regarded as a barometer for the whole country. But to do well, Muskie has to compete with a Florida favorite, George Wallace. So it's hardly surprising that Wallace is a prime target in his speeches.
Now, there's a candidate running in this primary whose whole career has been built upon playing upon people's fears, and his name is George Wallace. And I'm told that he's going to win that primary on March 14th. Well, I don't believe it either. I don't believe it either. But what I want to make clear to those people, and there are such people in Florida, who are in doubt about whether or not to vote for him, let me say to them that he is, whatever happens in Florida, he is not going to be the next Democratic candidate for president. Of that you can be sure. And he certainly is not going to be the next president of the United States. So the question that faces you, and the reason he isn't, is that when people focus upon the values that he has represented in his campaign, and when they seriously consider putting a man in the White House who has that view of America and Americans, they'll turn away from him so fast that his head will spin. Americans just don't want. Americans just don't want that kind of a president. Americans want a president who is willing to reach out to every group of Americans and say to them, whoever they are, I'm going to work to make your life better. And I'm going to work to make it possible for you to reach out for opportunity wherever it exists, anywhere in this land. I'm going to try to change this country so that whoever you are, you will feel at home in your own country.
Muskie has not shown himself to be a political innovator, and his policies on the main issues like the economy, urban crime, and the Vietnam War are orthodox rather than original. But in an election where sincerity may become almost an issue in itself, Muskie's personal style could be his greatest strength on the long trail leading to the White House.